Hello and welcome to the Dungeon Masters Guild House. This is a weekly podcast where I, Matthew Whitby, sit down with a bunch of amazing creators in the DMsGuild creator space. This week, again, honored as always to be joined by the amazing Ginny Loveday. Thank you so much for taking the time.
And thanks for having me on. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, no, it's always an absolute pleasure to have people take time out of their schedules to sit down and chat. Straight off the bat, let's not mess around. For people who maybe aren't familiar with your work, what sort of projects are you sort of known for? Where are you coming from?
Well, so sort of all over the place. Most of my work's been Adventurers League products. I do a lot of behind-the-scenes work, but I've also written adventures as well. My most popular adventure was the DAL ELWO4 Jack of Daggers. So that was for the first Eberron Adventurers League campaign. I've also contributed to a lot of collaborative projects. I did a season 8 adventure, and just kind of like all over the place as far as like editing and stuff. I've worked on I don't have enough fingers for how many editing projects I've worked on because I've done like 6 within the last 2 months. So so a lot of the community created content or convention created content, whatever you want to call it, helped a lot of people with behind the scenes work on editing, story development, figuring out how it all goes together and all of that stuff. And I'd say as far as like I guess what I'm most known for, I don't know. I'm part of the Guild Adepts program, so a lot of people know my name from that, even if oddly enough, my name is not on a ton of products there yet.
I mean, I'm sure it's the case of a lot of these products have kind of long production lives, so it's like
Sometimes.
And okay, so you mentioned as well with the sort of venture league stuff like that, you do a lot of background stuff. Do you mind dipping into like what sort of background things do you do?
Well, so with the stuff in the background, I mean, most people think of like when you think of content creators, you're like, oh, what have you written? And well, I mean, I have written stuff, but
Yeah.
a lot of the behind the scenes work, just as important, would be the story development, making sure that it's all cohesive stories, especially when you're wanting to do like a trilogy for your convention, that you've got one overarching story and that it all makes sense and the lore is correct and all of that. And then a lot of editing work as well. I do tons of copy editing and a good deal of developmental editing. So that's, going through and making sure it all sounds good and looks good and is set up easily to run. So that's actually the bulk of what I do is that kind of work.
I guess that's I have a kind of like immediate sort of like logistical question with when it comes to like writing adventure arcs for Adventure League. How do you take into the fact that like the players in the first like adventure could, I don't know, like cause a series of I don't know, cataclysmic events that sort of cascade down? Is it?
Well, yeah, that is exactly one of the challenges. So a lot of times if you see the trilogy adventures that are written, like you'll have the first one and it assumes that you haven't done anything yet. It's the first one.
Yeah.
So then when you get to the second adventure at the beginning, you'll have like a little section on if they saved this NPC, then you'll start into it like this. If they didn't, then this, or if they stole this item, or a bunch of what if possible scenarios. Of course, it's impossible to predict everything that the PCs could do because whatever you think they're going to do something else. So just kind of, trying to figure out like what the most common things might be and kind of build in for those eventualities. And also you kind of have to take into consideration the fact that they might not even be playing them in order. They might play part 3 having never seen 2 or 1. So if they just start in with part 3, you got to add in a little section to where like your quest giver can just be like, okay, so I've had this adventuring party before me and they did all of this, but unfortunately they had to go, so here's where
Yeah.
you're at.
Yeah, no, it's very much catering to the every sort of possibility. And
Yeah.
how much of it is kind of tailored by sort of playtesting? Is it the case of like you've had like ever had a part where like, oh yeah, they've done this in this adventure that we probably should mention in the event that like this came out quite often?
Yeah, that actually, that's a good reason for playtesting and for playtesting with more than one group. Ideally, you want to playtest with 3 or more different groups because, like I said, stuff comes up and you didn't expect it, but if like it comes up with multiple groups, then oh, this is probably something I should have taken into consideration, and maybe need to not only put that in the things that can be affected, but put more in there for the story, for like if they all did this and the DMs all had to make something up, maybe we add something in there to where the DMs have something to work with.
Yeah, make their lives a little bit easier. So
Yeah.
I guess I'm curious then. So building from that, when did you like officially start like getting
Um,
involved in any part of the
I
process?
mean, who officially starts with anything? It just happens. But I
Yeah.
have, I know, you say yes to one thing, and before you realize it, you forget how to say no.
Yeah.
But I've been working in some capacity or another on creating content since about summer of 2017, so like 3 years now.
Mhm.
Um, and the majority of my early work was editor stuff. My first thing that I wrote was not the first thing that was published on DMsGuild.
Okay.
It was the second thing published. But the first thing I had published on DMsGuild, I contributed to a collaborative project. Jeff Stevens, I don't know if you've interviewed him yet.
No, I haven't. Again, he's I was about to say on the to-do list, but I mean like,
he'll be pleased to hear he's on someone's to-do list.
Yeah. I
Love you,
have
Jeff.
in a much more eloquent way. I have plans to interview him in the future.
Yes. But I contributed to he invited me to contribute to one of his Savage Encounters projects. So that was back when Chult was a thing. So Encounters in the Savage Jungle was actually my first published thing. And shortly thereafter, published a CCC, so Community Created Content Adventure, that I worked with friend of mine, David Morris, little company thing he had, Mount Ogden Gaming. And so we developed a bunch of different trilogies for various conventions, and I wrote first adventure in one of those trilogies. So then that got published, and it's been a bit crazy since then.
Yeah, the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah.
So so was it the I guess what was the kind of drive to get involved? Was it the fact just you had the invitation, or were you kind of involved in the sort of like I guess like Adventure League scene of like going to like weekly sessions or like conventions and that sort of thing? Or
yeah, certainly. By then, I was definitely involved in the Adventurers League scene because I actually been involved in Adventurers League since it got started. So the beginning of 5th edition, and I was a local coordinator briefly while that was a thing, and then I was the regional coordinator for my area. So I was really heavily involved in the organized play aspect of it. So going to all of the conventions and stuff. So when they announced the program for where conventions could create content, naturally, all of the conventions in the Southeast region where I manage were all like, how do we do this?
yeah.
So
you were just like, well, actually, since you ask, like hat on.
Yeah. So since I had to do all the research into figuring out how to do all of it and everything, I already knew like the steps and all of that. And then people were like, okay, so can you just do it for me? Like, what do you mean, just write? And they're like, yeah, no, that'll be great if you could just write something. And I was just like, I don't know, but if you think so, sure.
And yeah, no, it seems like it 100% it has paid off amazingly.
Yeah, no, and it's been great for getting to know like so many amazing people. Worked with a bunch of amazingly talented people from the DMsGuild, so a bunch of people that have been there since the beginning of it. Really prolific people. Gotten to know tons of people in the convention circuit and everything. It's been I mean, it's been a great part of my life, and it's been good.
Yeah, I think it's always nice to hear. And I guess I'm curious. So with a lot of the with I take it, so with the more recent stuff that you've published has sort of been very much involved in the Eberron Adventure League.
Yeah.
Is Eberron like a favorite setting of yours, or you just sort of keep up to date with whatever is the newest?
Well, try to keep up to date with what's newest, but also when they first announced the Eberron coming to 5th edition, I like steampunk. Okay. I'm not gonna lie. I love steampunk. So I was like super pumped for it. And then when they gave the Guild Adepts program the opportunity to produce that first storyline for the Embers of the Last War, I was just kind of like over the moon. And then I realized, oh God, I don't know enough to do this. So then I read a lot of books about Eberron, a lot of books, a large amount of books.
many books.
many books. And yeah, and that was the scene again as I was working on the Eberron Salvage Guide that we recently put out. I was in my office at home and I had a table here with one copy of Rising from the Last War, and then another copy of it open to a different page, and then like a third copy of it open, and then on my laptop a different digital copy of it open, because I was like, I need all of these pages at once.
It's so much quicker.
It really is. And then of course, I had some of the older materials as well, sprawled out. So like my office was just covered in Eberron books. But no, I really do. I love it. Excited for actually kind of working a little bit now on a new project with the Guild Adepts for the upcoming Theros setting.
Yes, that's just around the corner, isn't it? I
love Greek mythology. I stopped playing Magic the Gathering in like 2012, 2013, something around there. So I'm not super up on that, but done some reading back into it. Got a bit of the Theros stuff now, and I am, it's gonna be so much fun. Fun. We've started on it, and I'm really jazzed.
That is one thing I kind of like about the I guess all the sort of the new sort of products coming in, and it's just that they sort of bring a very sort of new distinct flavor. Obviously everyone tailoring to the sort of like I guess like tech punk. Like I don't know, I think like Eberron is like it's like a unique brand of steampunk. And I think I've seen discussions on the internet where people are just like, no, it's not steampunk, it's X-punk, or no, it's not X-punk, it's but it's never quite a setting that I've jumped into. But seeing so much sort of interesting stuff come out of it, I think I'm probably gonna have to grab the book one day. I'm gonna have to dip back into it.
It's definitely an interesting setting when you really dive into it. I've worked on 3 different areas of it now. Sharn, out in the Mournlands, and then the Demon Waste, and those were all completely different experiences. Nothing I knew from any of the other regions was useful at all.
In fairness, but now with all of that, you're very well versed in at least these 3 areas. Obviously, there's many more areas to any sort of.
Yeah, somebody's gonna be like, okay, we're writing in this area, and I'm gonna be like, where is that even at?
Yeah. Please tell me they're at least bordering one of the areas I've written in, so I can at least have some sort of overlap.
No, of course not.
But no, let's start digging into your sort of creative process. When it came to like, I guess with like any of these, where do your ideas come from? How do you start them?
Well, so a lot of that really is going to depend on what kind of project it is. So like sometimes when you're working on a collaborative project, you very much have someone who's project manager, who's front runner, and they're like, okay, so say for like the encounters, I mean, you probably picked up or seen one of the encounters books that the Guild Adepts have put out. We're like, okay, so these are like the types of areas, city, mountain, forest, sea. And in those areas, we're going to have like 20 encounters for each area and go.
Yeah.
So that gives you kind of like very much a starting. You're like, okay, so let me go find some creatures that are in the, sea area, and relevant to the storyline.
Yeah.
And let me just kind of paw through all of those and be like, okay, all right, so we've got an aboleth, and that is really freaking cool monstrous. So what does an aboleth do, and how is it crazy? And, and for like encounters and stuff, like starting with either the monsters themselves or like unique locations is a good way to just kind of be like branch off of that specific seed and be like, okay, so if say in Eberron I'm on the Glass Plateau, which was this huge area in the Mournlands that was completely turned to glass by all of the magic that was happening there, and there's all kinds of stuff trapped in it and a lot of magical energy that's stuck around and stuff. You're like, okay, so all of that happening, a lot of cool environmental effects and stuff, and so it just kind of gets you rolling on like what encounters there could look like. If you're doing something like a lot more involved, like writing an entire adventure, that's obviously a bit more of a thing. Then it's usually like, what kind of story do I want to tell? Are we doing like a dungeon crawl thing? Are we doing an investigation? And I'm not writing any more investigations. This is not my forte. I found I wrote one, and it's they're really fun when they're done well, and I am not afraid to admit my my weaknesses, and that is one, is that I'm not super great at making a mystery without making it railroady, and no one really wants to play a railroady adventure. It's just not super fun.
Well, so if you don't mind, so do you mind like so what aspects do you think you felt that you railroad in the sort of, because I guess it's difficult because in most sort of adventure there is always going to be one killer unless you make it
there's one killer, but like it can be a lot more sandbox. Like, so you start and you know what the mystery is, and there can be like all of these various locations that you go, and you can find the clues in any order and kind of piece it all together like that, which is a lot more difficult to write than, okay, so you talk to the first guy, and he says that last place she was seen was at this tavern, and you go there and you find a clue which leads you to the next point, which leads you to the next, which leads you to the next, which, while it makes sense and you're slowly unraveling the mystery, it's not as fulfilling as a player as being able to be like, okay, well, we know this, and that doesn't make any sense at all. So where else can we go and find stuff out? And just kind of running all over town, or all over the Sword Coast or wherever it is that you're running all over. It's just it's a bit more, you feel like you have more agency when you're able to kind of like bounce around between places, rather than like, okay, we're at this place and we have to figure out what it is that we need to find here. If we don't find it, then we can't move on to the next place.
Because I guess they don't know where the next place is.
Because you don't know where it is.
I guess, I suppose it depends. That's why I imagine a lot of murder mysteries happen within like a locked manor or that sort of location, because it's like, oh, well, we know the extent of where they could go, and it's all sort of self-contained. But then it is a case of like, there's been a good number of murders in a manor. Maybe spice it up a little bit, spread it around town. But then that invites the problems.
You can do things in a very contained location. Murder on the Orient Express was very well done, and it had only so many points. But like, I don't know. I don't feel like it's a spoiler to be like, there were a lot of options where he could go and find stuff out, and every time he found something else out, he had to go talk to someone again, and it just kind of back and forth and all over the place before he finally was just like, aha. I don't know. I personally am not capable, in adventure form at least, of setting up all of that suspense and everything, and just making it to where, like, when it is that aha moment, you feel very fulfilled as a player for having figured it out.
Okay, well then I guess to sort of I spin it into a positive then. What are you? Yeah, what do you feel like?
What am I good at?
No, yeah, but what do you feel like? You grasp fully and you actually enjoy like yeah.
Yeah, so I do enjoy doing like a lot of exploration type adventures, where you know, I mean, a lot of it is still seems very trite because the overall idea is you're going and you're figuring out a thing still, or you're finding a thing or whatever. But there's a lot to figure out about the place, the realm, the people on the way, and just like a kind of like a decent amount of exposition and stuff, but also like to where you don't have to find like all of it's not a mystery to be solved. You don't have to find all of the clues in order to save the village or kill the monster or whatever it is. Generally a little bit more streamlined. Working on some stuff now. I tend to do a lot of pull this into sight and then quickly put it away. A lot of like flow charting type stuff.
Yeah, nice.
Oh, everyone's gonna pause that now.
Yeah,
so they can read it.
I could do some video editing to make it seem like it's like, oh no, it's just you bring in like a white piece of paper and then sort of move it back.
Yeah. I don't even know if any of that would make sense if anybody read it. Or my handwriting's actually surprisingly good on that one right there. No, so maybe.
So it very much a sort of like branching path design.
Yeah, branches and paths and stuff of that nature, to where it's just very free form, but also still kind of regimented adventure where you're going and you're off on your classic adventure to find out like where did this tower come from all of a sudden, and why can't we get into it? The classic high fantasy type mysteries or stuff, and a lot of the Adventures League stuff and all is that sort of stuff. So that kind of works well for me, to where like you kind of get like an overarching story for the season, and then like you have your section to where like this is what they know so far, and by the end of it they need to know this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Make a cool adventure to figure out how they find that thing out, and you're like, okay, well they can go pretty much anywhere in the world and have some sort of adventure, and then they talk to a person or solve a puzzle or find a special magic item or whatever it is, and then they're like, now I know the thing.
So do you find it kind of easier then sometimes when to sort of be given that essentially that prompt from like a previous adventure than necessarily starting from scratch? Or
I personally do find it a little bit easier. It takes off a little bit of the pressure of having to just like come up with the entire thing. I've also written stuff for conventions where they're like, you need to set it in this area of the world and go.
Wow,
and I'm like, okay, so like any specific adversaries? Is there anything I need to? And they're like, no, it's fine.
Get crazy.
Like, okay. That ended up going pretty well. I was complaining to my mother about not knowing what to do for that one, and she'd played D&D with me once and had the cutest little character, and she's like, are you writing an adventure about Simon? And I, if your mom asks if you're writing an adventure about your character, I was like, of course I am.
Yeah.
I am now.
and that was like the sort of the spark of inspiration behind that whole sort of adventure then.
Yeah, so then I was sitting there and I was like, okay, so I know who her character is, so like what sort of shenanigans would you get to?
In fairness, like they do say, was it ideas come out of the weirdest of places, but no, just your mum going, write adventure about my character is probably up there as like a fantastic inspiration.
Yeah, she's anxiously awaiting it to be published on the DMsGuild. That one is not up yet. I know she's gonna.
Do you know
First person I gift it to.
Do you know how long it might be before it's going to be up there? Because with like Adventure League and CC titles, they sometimes...
It will be up there soon.
TM.
Real soon. No, it is actually in the queue to be reviewed right now. So soon as the admins get the bandwidth to sort through the rest of that, they're working on it. They are swamped.
Yeah, no, I can imagine.
But yeah, no, like ideas kind of come from all over the place. Sometimes you're sitting there reading a book and you're like, what if it didn't go this way?
Yeah.
What if it went like this? Oh, that could be a cool adventure. Yeah. Or yeah. I mean, and that's actually kind of one of the favorite parts of any project with me is like sitting there and like brainstorming concepts with friends. I've got a partner that he and I do a lot of that. We just because he's super into D&D and he has an entire living room full of minis and miniature terrains that he builds. And we sat there and we're like, okay, so what if we had this thing and we were here, could do this, and these could be problems? And then we'd be like, no, that's silly. Let's change this one thing. And then, just kind of like bouncing through all of that, or being like, what region of the world is cool?
Yeah. And then it just sort of sparking those sort of conversations, and then next thing you know, you have a written adventure in your hands.
Yeah, some of it sparks, or you just write down some notes in your book, and then you write down some more notes, and then you realize, oh man, if I smush like these 6 things together, that would be really awesome.
I think it is the case as well with the notes. Like I make notes on my phone, but it's a case of when you sometimes revisit them, you think, what was I all right when I wrote this? This seems like a weird connection of weird ideas. I've just written gnome canon. I don't know what this means. But...
Okay, so I don't know what that means either, but that sounds really cool. Who was writing our gnome canon adventure?
I guess I am now.
I guess you are now. Yeah, you're writing a gnome canon adventure. Let's see, what's the weirdest thing that I've got down here? Let's see. Demon cows. That's not super weird.
I think
that's pretty normal.
I think there's
I don't know.
There's like a adventure on the DMsGuild already about, I think, demon cows. Is it by I think it's either by Alex Clippinger or Oliver Clegg. Oh, I'm gonna quickly find this one. I think it's like when the cows come home. I need to find this for my own sake.
I think that might have been Alex, but that you're right though. That could go either way. It could be either of them. Yeah, I don't actually have a lot of super cool notes in this particular journal. This is a rather fresh journal. All of mine with weird notes are in my office in Chicago. But yeah, I mean that's kind of like the favorite part.
Oh, well, oh, hello. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. I dipped for a moment.
Okay. Well, let me.
Everything seems to be right. So it happened. Sorry, just after you said your book in Chicago, and you said that was your favorite part.
Yeah.
And then I was like, that's an amazing segue, because one of my questions is what is your favorite part of the whole sort of process? So it is that sort of initial brainstorming.
Yeah, and then like on the opposite end of that, least favorite part would be. It always is. Yeah, I know. That's the next question, right? The initial revisions. So you've done your brainstorming, you've done your outline, your concept, you've done up your first draft, and you love it. You put your heart and your soul in it, and this is your baby now.
Yeah.
And then you send it to an editor. You go over it yourself and realize how much of it you wrote sounds really dumb now that you read it again.
Yep.
You send it to an editor, and you get it back from your trusted friend and editor who loves you and isn't afraid to tell you that your stuff looks like garbage.
That's how you know they love you.
That's how you know.
They show their love through the sort of like all the red lines and highlights in the Google Docs. That's how you know they care.
That's really how you know they care. They're like, I think I see what you're going for here. This sounds dumb. Can you write it differently? Like maybe like something that makes sense like this. And I'm like, oh, that does sound a lot better. You're right. Yeah. But like it's always a bit of a sting, to go back and be like, oof, oh, there's so much here that could just be a lot better. But also though, like it's kind of, I don't know. I don't want to say fulfilling because it always hurts a bit, but there's always something to improve. It doesn't matter how good it is the first time, how crazy amazing your idea sounds, and like the project just sounds perfect to begin with, and we're not going to change anything. After you write down your first draft, you're like, yeah, this is great, but we can add a bit more here so that everybody knows what I know in my head and somehow didn't make it on paper the first time. Because otherwise DMs are going to be like, but why are we doing that?
Yeah, I think it, like the first pass with an editor is very much like a sanity check. And you sort of like, it catches you from being so caught up in the own project that you miss the important things, or
and a lot of it getting back from that first check is, can you explain why they should care about this? And you're like, but it's obvious in my head because I know the backstory.
Yeah.
Got it.
And cool. I care because I created it. So of course,
exactly.
This character I've spent 3 hours writing about. Of course you're gonna love them. I've just spent 3 hours writing about them.
No, I've written about some characters and not been fond of them, but yeah. So I mean, that's like my least favorite part, but it's a very necessary part. Like, I have never met a project that didn't need revising.
Yeah.
So, if you think your project doesn't need revising, you need to send it to a different editor. Your friend is being too nice to you.
So I guess so this actually adds, being working as you've worked and edited some projects as well. On the flip side, when it comes to like you've just been handed someone's first draft, are there any sort of particular enjoyable or least favorite parts of that process?
It is. That can kind of go either way. Like, you can get something and, first thing you do is just read the whole thing. And it can, be like, you'd be super excited because you've just read an amazing story. Doesn't need a lot of work. You can see some places where, minor adjustments, need some clarity here and everything. And you've read through it and all, and now you're part of the project and you're just as excited as the author because you're like, we're going to get this bad boy published soon. This is great. This is good. And then other times, like, you get something, you read through it, and you're like, okay, your idea that I can feel behind this has a lot of promise. But I don't know how to politely tell you that what is written on the paper right now is a pile of steaming trash. But good news, we can fix it.
Yeah.
And I've had projects to where brand new author, they've never written anything before, and the idea they had, absolutely great, but execution was just not there. And it's really kind of heart-wrenching because you want to see them succeed. You're like, I want all my new children to go out there in the world, but like, it's hard if you've never written anything in the format before, if you don't write at all frequently. Like, there's a lot of grammatical things that'll trip you up. Spelling is hard.
Yeah. And I suppose there is a obviously with the adventure leagues or DMsGuild products, there is the wizard's way of writing. Obviously, and it's very particular. Like, I think the I don't know if it's the same for when you come to edit, but the cans and wills, they have to go. You can't, there's no can, there's no will, they just do.
You just do. You don't write anything in passive voice. And I'm guilty of that as well. Like, a lot of times I'll write something and then come back and be like, yeah, I was flip-flopping between active and passive, and let me just go back and they do these things.
Yeah.
They don't feel as if they just do. They just do.
They just do. I think what was it? It's just I would get that on the t-shirt. It says just do. Just that's a trademark. Just like, don't think about it. Just do.
Yeah, adventurers just do things. They just do it. That's why they're adventurers. They just bravely, full-heartedly rushing right into the trap headfirst. But it's one way to find it.
So then I imagine after that sort of initial first draft and then going through the whole process, is it quite fulfilling to sort of see a project come out the other end? Yeah,
it really is. Like once you get involved as an editor or something, or even earlier story development, to kind of see it go through all those steps and to kind of grow and just like get better through each iteration. You're like seeing the idea in your head or the idea that you perceive to be in the author's head.
Yeah.
Hopefully you're on the same page at that point. Just kind of, grow into this cool thing, and then hopefully you've got someone good on art and layout and all of that, because that's not me and I can't do that. And then it starts looking beautiful, and then you publish it, and it's amazing, and it is really fulfilling. I get excited anytime something I helped with goes to publish, even if like I agreed to take like a flat fee up front and I'm never going to see any more money. I'm always like, we've published it. Oh, you're getting a lot of sales. I'm so excited. So yeah, it is fulfilling. Like no matter what part of the project you're in, whether you're, editing, layout, whatever, it's, kind of a team thing.
Yeah. No, honestly, that's it's kind of I admit it was a bit of a weird question, because like it's hard not for that process to be like to see the labors of everyone's work to sort of pull into the sort of the finished product when it all sort of comes together at the finish line.
You can end up disappointed too, because you put all that love and labor into everything and then no one buys it, which is always really sad, because then you get into that kind of spiral of what did we do wrong? Why does everyone hate it? And then it's usually not even that. It's not that you did anything wrong. It's a very well made product, and it's just not needed.
Yeah, adventures are a weird one when it comes to the DMsGuild. Like again, so there's so many amazing products out there. But it's always hard to judge the good time for an adventure that doesn't necessarily tie in with the newest hard book.
Right.
And sometimes like it's really nice to see sort of like adventures fill gaps where they're like, oh, this is a perfect supplement to a hard book. But when it comes to like, oh, I've written this Waterdeep adventure, and everyone's like, let's go to Theros. Where everyone's wearing their togas, and you're there like, hey guys, I've recently written like. It's always relatively.
It's really great to come up with something original and creative that kind of fills a need that no one even knew existed. Like you mentioned, Alex and Oliver, they're both great at just coming up with these creative ideas, and you're like, I never thought about that, and I didn't know I needed to play that, but I need more gay unicorns in my life. I didn't realize I had the lack.
It was there the whole time, and I've been living an unfulfilled life without these hags and unicorns.
It's just like crazy, the stuff you're like, I do need that. You're right. But yeah, so super fulfilling, can also like not be, but it's always something.
It's the game we play.
Yeah.
Sorry, I guess that kind of leads sort of into the sort of talking about the process when it comes to like the end. Do you mind? Are there anything that you kind of wish you knew earlier on in the process that you've picked up along the way that you would go back to like a younger Ginny and just like, hey.
Something I picked up through all of this that I would go back to a much younger me, even before I started all of this writing, and tell myself. Is I've definitely learned through all of this how to force myself to block out my time better to meet, certain checkpoints earlier in the creative process, rather than sitting there and procrastinating and pushing things off and thinking, oh, I'll get it done later. Nothing's going to suffer for me waiting. The deadline's not until way down the line. It's fine. It's so much easier, and you have a lot more time to like if you just write your thing or just do your outline or do your rough draft or whatever, and then allow yourself to have that time to just sit on it. Don't do anything. Don't touch it. Work on something else. And then come back to it, look at it again, realize how great it is or how garbage it is or whatever your opinion on it is at that point after several days not looking at it. And then have time to do it again before your rough draft deadline. Or, so you're not like rushing to like type up the last words in the rough draft and be like, it's 11:55 p.m. Made it.
Yeah.
It's not the same as doing term papers, which I also wish I would have done those earlier. That's the younger me that I would have taught this lesson to.
Just start earlier, finish earlier.
Yeah. I mean, my term papers were obviously great. I got A's on most of them. But, which is probably the reason I never taught myself these skills earlier. Teachers should have graded me harsher so that I would have been like, no, I need to do it sooner.
Yeah.
But that's probably like the biggest lesson I've learned, and especially since I spent a lot of time. I spent almost 6 months from like last September on through March, where I didn't have a full-time job, and so I was just freelancing. So making myself get out of bed and write or outline or find work or any of those, things that creative people have to do. And like, it's hard to like make yourself just like, you're like, I have to get up and I need to write. I don't know. I can't put word count limits on myself. Like I need to write 2,500 words today, because then my anxiety and my depression and all of that in my brain kick in, and they're like, oh, we're never going to make it. Let's not do it. Why bother? Let's just take a nap. Like a nice depression nap will be good. So like, I understand like mentally and everything, like I can't do that to myself. I can't be like, I'm going to write 2,500 words every day, because that doesn't happen. And then I just, whole different set of problems. But being able to be like, all right, this week I want to finish like this many sections, or get a good start on them at least, like gonna do this whole intro section and gonna work through this bit in the middle where it's all narrative exposition and stuff, and we're going around because those are going to be like the hard parts, and then you kind of fill everything else in. And that's another thing, is like you kind of learn that like you don't have to start at the beginning and go through to the end. With adventure writing, you're like, you can write this bit and then this bit and then be like, all right, this is a good connector for those bits. And
I think all of that. It's kind of nice. The I kind of agree with the whole like writing to a word count. It feels almost too limiting. But what's nice about adventure writing is the fact that you can make sections and subsections, and it breaks everything down into like easily writable chunks. And if I'm at like a certain subsection, which is like I don't know, a room, the encounter in like room 37, B37, I'm like, I can't do this right now. Let's try B38, and then you sort of go through that, and then sometimes that helps.
You're like room B38 doesn't have a combat. I don't really have to think about all these mechanics right now. I just need to make it kind of creepy and ominous. What's in the boxes?
And then from there you can sort of like go, okay, that's good. And then when you're feeling up to like the mechanics and the chunks,
go back.
I can dip straight in. So
exactly.
So as well, so I guess was there any other was there any, I kind of want to ask like almost like a selfish question, which is like, are there any sort of lessons from like a narrative standpoint? So you sometimes come on with like almost like was not story guidance. What's the technical term? I guess I'm stumping myself. When you're brought into a project to sort of help with the story arc, or I guess the thread through the adventure, what are some things that you sort of either like you learned from earlier on, or you kind of pick newer authors on?
That's a bit harder of a one to figure out, like where I've learned lessons and stuff. Like, I guess the hardest lesson that I've learned there is that, because I've always done creative writing.
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing creative writing for a long time. 15 plus years. And I'm not very old, so.
I know, right? Like that, when you said a long time, I was ready to trust you. I was like,
yeah, over half my life I've been doing it. So like being able to tell a good story is one thing, and it's very important and all. But it really kind of varies depending on like what level of adventurer you're writing adventures for, like how important and how involved that story is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Like for higher level characters, there's going to be a lot more focus on the story because your adventurers, they're almost gods at that point. So mm-hmm. like there are very few like combat encounters that you can throw at them that aren't just trivial. So focusing on the combat and throughout an adventure for high tier players, they would just feel very unsatisfied because they can easily just throw a lot of magic at it, or all their legendary items or whatever cool things they've worked, and then they're like, okay, we've slayed the giants. Why did we do that? What's the purpose here? Like, what are we saving the world? Like, so you've really got to have like all of that compelling story behind any adventure you create for them. Like, what's your your driving motivation? Like, where are you going to find this information? This information can't be easy to find. You've got to really like fight for it and struggle for it and all of that. And so like narratively, like all of that becomes like super important at higher levels versus like at lower levels it's important. But at lower levels you can also like hand a lot of the story to your players because like combats are challenging. You don't want to make it like overly hard narratively for them to get information. Like they shouldn't have to struggle to figure out like that we have to go to the the Anorak desert in order to find the sage who's the only person who knows where to find the cure for the mysterious malady or whatever. Like you can't just like, they only have so many resources. They're brand new baby adventurers. So, narratively, like that's the main difference between like where you're writing is just like how much of that lore and everything you really want to pour into it and, make everything seem super important and tie into like, why are we doing this in the world? Like low level characters, you're like, well, Farmer Johnny has been having his crops die day after day after day, and it's really upsetting to him. And so he's hired some adventurers, and that's you. And you're like, yeah, we're gonna help Farmer Johnny, or else,
Yeah. And then I suppose on the high tier, it's like, the farmers, the league, the nation known as the Farmers League, are having all of their crops wiped out by 7 liches.
Liches.
That's because in what I've done so far, I must admit, I've kind of avoided the higher tiers of play. Just because from like a writing standpoint, it's hard to think of like one combat challenges and like trying to like the idea of like a branching path. I feel like it's much, you kind of need to hammer it home more with like high tier because there's so much more they can do. Like at any point, like you could just assume they may have the power to just teleport to the end boss immediately. So maybe...
so you can't let them know. You can't let them know up front like where they're going or anything, because then they'll just be like, "Yeah, we just teleport there." Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
It costs how much materials? Yeah, just.
It's like, I've got to save the world in about 30 minutes. So if we can like just teleport, I'll pay for this one. You guys get the next one.
Or it's like, there's all these walls, and they're like, okay, we're just gonna gaseous form everybody and go through the keyhole. Like,
it's a magic keyhole. Okay, well, we'll use arcane lock or knock. It's like, no.
Like, like, okay, yep, no, you do that.
But
The floor is literally lava. Okay, we're just gonna ice, just fine.
but yeah, that's why it's kind of easier to sort of like fall into that thing of like, yeah, the farmers. Let's because it's real and you can sort of balance the threats. But no,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense, and the fact that, as you mentioned, bring it back around to focus again that more reliance on story for the high tier stuff, and then I guess kind of just trying your best to give tools for the DM to be like, okay, listen, I know there's a lot they could do, but here are like some, I guess.
Here are like the important story elements that you need to make sure that they find out. And here are some interesting locations. And here's some cool monsters if you want to do that. Yeah, here's your framework. Within that, I don't know what they're going to do, and you don't know what they're going to do. So just make sure we hit these points in some order of semblance, and then we get to the end. And you've done it.
Hey, no, that's yeah. I must admit, I really hadn't thought about like that side of adventure writing, at least for high tier. And
I also prefer not to write for high tier adventures for that same reason. Like it's very hard to think of so many varying compelling reasons. Like, why should they care?
It's people who are like beyond reasonable power, sitting on their mountains of gold because they've done years of adventuring, and you're just like, would you like to leave your tower of gold to maybe save the world? And they're like,
we have to figure out how to evacuate this entire continent because this giant volcano has exploded. They're like, oh, I own like 12 ships. What sort of ships? Oh, they're warships. They can each hold 3,000 people. How many people live here? And you're like, well, that gets like half of them. And then someone else is like, well, I've got magical airship, and then you've got a couple of wizards who are like, oh, I can teleport. Like how many? Like,
oh, I'm here with this ring of volcanoes. I forgot that I had this time. Let me just boot.
Let me just cast a quick time stop, and we'll just slowly walk them away. It's fine.
So yeah, no, honestly, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I must admit, I don't have a good segue from that about this.
That's okay.
So I'm just going to hand wave and sort of look to the future. So do you have any sort of particular dream projects or anything that you sort of like you would love to get involved in? Or
all right, so dreams. So we're talking like big dreams. Doesn't have to have any ties into anything that's happening or anything in reality.
Nothing. Like I said, nothing is going to be held in court against you.
All right, so I don't know if this is a secret, but I don't talk about it very much because it doesn't come up. But I like Dragonlance. You know what? I'm gonna walk that back. I love Dragonlance. I read all the novels. I love the characters. I love the setting. It's very romantic type adventure story, and so dream project. I'd have to get better at that whole branching things and all of that. It'd be like to write some sort of like Dragonlance adventure path where all of the paths kind of branch off depending on the relationships that the characters develop with the NPCs. So kind of like like Dragon Age, the video game. Like, you develop a relationship with this character and it gives you this whole storyline. Or if you piss them off, you get this other storyline and, stuff like that. And so, like, that would be a huge endeavor.
Yeah.
And there would have to be, you're basically at that point, you're writing like a couple dozen different adventures and you're like, it's a choose your own adventure. You're basically like, okay, if they do this, then they go to this adventure. If they do this, then they go to this one. And so it's just like so much. And then, once you get into that one, if they do this, then go to sub adventure.
Yeah. Like, how do you rein it back in? Or do you just continue? Like,
well, at some point, no matter whether they, have created an alliance with these 4 characters and they're married to these other two, like the Great War unfolds, and we all must band together. We're gonna bring it back in.
The Avengers, yeah.
Yeah, something of that nature. That is a dream because one, I got to do a lot more writing before I feel like confident enough in like my ability to tie all of those narrative storylines together, and or recruit a party of people with the skills to tie all those narrative
and then you have
together.
To balance your relationship with all the other creators, and then eventually if you get too friendly with others, you end up with this particular
real life analog of the story writing. Yeah. But no, that would be super fun, and I would love to work with that property because like I think that specifically like the Dragonlance setting lends itself a lot more to those kind of stories based on character relationships because it is a lot more about that. It's a lot more about like have you gone and made buddy with the knights? Are they gonna protect your section of the kingdom? Which dragons have you pissed off? And why did you decide to do that? That was a poor choice.
I think generally annoying dragons is probably like on the lower end of choices you could make. It's often poor.
It just happens sometimes.
Yeah. 1 minute you're like working on your gnome cannon. Next minute
you didn't mean to do it, but like you were at the inn and you were learning how to cook and you accidentally burnt it down and there was this huge fire and the smoke disturbed the sleeping dragon and it was just like it all just snowballed.
I do like the idea of like a group of people playing D&D and they're just like, yeah, so you set the tavern on fire. That angers a nearby dragon. And it's like, what? No! I didn't know my cooking was that bad.
Why? It was just like, well, the dragon hates the smell of burning flesh and you just cooked 50 villagers and you're like, oh yeah, no, that would be bad. Yeah,
we did that. No, that sounds like an awesome project. We can only hope that Dragonlance is off in the near horizon.
Well, there will be obviously there will be no Dragonlance projects from me because we can't publish them on the DMsGuild. So
yet I'm ever hopeful.
Let's see, who do we need to convince of that?
I'm just gonna
Perkins,
send emails.
Crawford, I don't know, somebody.
Yeah. I think if we form our
somebody.
own Legion of Knights, and then they politely, in a courtly manner, as befitting of knights, made a case. I think we can maybe do some courting to keep it again very sort of setting thematic.
I mean, maybe we should just start with, Margaret and Tracy and just go from there and see, like, pretty please.
Yeah, please. So speaking of the community, there you go. I found a segue this time. Is there anyone in the DMsGuild, or I'll also expand this to the Adventure League community that particularly inspires you?
Okay, so I have a list that I wrote down for this one, and I apologize in advance to anyone that gets left off of it.
What we'll say is, if anyone feels like they should have been on the list that weren't, I do harsh cutting. I had to trim for time, and unfortunately their name didn't make the cut. So you're in the clear.
Yeah, that's fine. I've been very fortunate though to be part of the Guild Adepts program, and in that I got to work with so many of the creators that inspired me, like James Introcaso, MT Black, Ashley Warren, Rich Lucaflair, Will Doyle, Sean Merwin, and just for starters there. And then even outside of that group, I've had the pleasure of working with people like Jeff Stevens, who's absolute doll. I rave about Jeff all the time. And then like people who I haven't necessarily worked with, but inspire me by just like their creativity and stuff, like Merrick Blackman, Oliver, and Alex, and Ashley May, just prolific creators, constant creativity, and just their contributions to the community, like bringing people in, doing all these collaborative projects and being like, yeah, your idea is weird, but it's so weird, it's going to work because watch this weird.
Yeah.
And so like, yeah, I mean, and there's, a huge list of other people who've like been working with the guild since like the beginning and have been instrumental in just like being so open and welcoming to the community, and like all of those people, like I love them. Those are my people, because like that's the thing for me. Like a lot of my work behind the scenes was like finding writers, walking them through how to do the program, and then helping them get their stuff published through the program, finding them a thing. So like getting people in there and being like, I believe in you. Like those are the people who like really inspire me the most. So if you did any collaborative projects, your name is on this list.
So this is where the credits roll on screen, and it's just like, just put your name. It's on there somewhere. I think I love asking this question. I also I realize the position I put in people, because it's always a case of like, there's so many people I want to name. But it kind of, every time I ask it, I always feel have that sort of like, that warm feeling. I forgot to
thank the Academy at the beginning of that, right?
You get that warm feeling inside of like, yeah, these are all people that I'm aware of, and we're a good community, us lot. Yeah. So I think we are coming to the end of our allotted time. What I might do is I'm gonna sort of like do a sort of Frankenstein merge of like the last two questions. Of number one, what are the interesting projects that are you're working on that you can speak about, which I know adds like a big caveat to what you can. And secondly, people who are just like, wow, that sounds really interesting. I would love a Dragonlance adventure. How can they find out about it?
So things I'm currently working on, I've got 3 open writing projects right now.
Ooh.
Some others that I haven't accepted yet, but they're kind of out there and I may or may not work on them. The aforementioned thing with the Guild Adepts, we're working on some stuff for Theros, so that'll be out around when the book comes out, so super excited for that. The other 2 things I can't talk about, so they're going to be great, obviously. Yeah. And then I'm not doing any editing right now because I got those 3 things, and that's a lot already.
Yeah, no, I can imagine.
But as far as like where can people find out about my work, I post a lot on Facebook, Twitter. Those are kind of hard to follow sometimes though, so I have a website where I list all of my works. And then if there's any upcoming projects that I can comment on, I try to post something on there about those as well. And that is, it's just my name, JennyLoveday.com. Just put my name into Google and you can find all of my stuff on the internet. Nice. I know, right?
Yeah, it's fortunate to have one of the names you don't Google it and they're like, oh, there's 30 Matt Whitbys and most of them are dentists. So scroll through all the. No, for me, I think I share a name with an actual doctor. But other than that, I think if you type in my name and then dungeon in any sense, it's all me. So
yeah,
I'm happy with that.
Well, so thank you again for having me on. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
No, thanks so much for finding the time. It's been a blast. I've learned things, and as long as I come away from these learning things, I think every week I do learn something, and it's amazing to sort of again.
That's kind of the thing of it. We're all always learning, and that's fun.
Yeah, I have always said this podcast I've made purely for selfish reasons of just finding cool people to chat to and getting like little lessons so I'll sneak through. And I just so happen to post them online. But yeah, no, honestly, thank you so much, Ginny, for taking the time. I've been Matt. I always do have one last question. How do you end a podcast?
How do I end a podcast?
Yeah, I mean, like every week I take suggestions. I don't know how to do it yet.
So I run a podcast.
Ooh.
Yeah. So my friend Paige Lightman and I co-host the D&D Roundtable.
Yes.
We end each of our episodes, kind of wrap it up with our last question, and then ask, so where can everyone find you on the internet? Everyone goes through their Twitter, their website, their whatever thing they want to pimp out. And then we just wrap it with, that's it for this week's episode of The Roundtable. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, like us, leave a review, blah, 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 blah. Tune in next week. Or next time.
That sounds way more professional than some of the edits. Honestly, the way that I've ended some of these podcasts, I'm gonna go for that. I'm Matthew Whitby. Thank you so much for joining us on the Dungeon Masters Guild House. You can find me online at Whitby Writes, and I will see you next time.